But before we start, let's see. I have a special playlist. At least I think I do. Yep. Let's get started. Intersectional pride. Pride at Juneteenth. Queer liberation is and has been routinely whitewashed, not just in retrospect, but in the moment as well. People routinely point to Marsha P. Johnson as a queer activist, but few know of Bernard Rustin. Or I don't think that word's getting covered up. Or others. We'll get to who that third person is in a minute. But that is all to say that because of the need for queer liberation and because of the lack of intersectionality between different communities looking for liberation for their respective groups, the intersectional figures have been lost to time, or at the very least they haven't been given as much, how do I put this? They haven't been given as much attention. Bernard Rustin, for example, worked with Martin Luther King and, you know, helped organize the Freedom Riders, and actually doesn't have a lot of visibility in American civil rights history despite his influence, partially because he was a gay man, but also because he was a socialist. Historically, because of the prevalence of Christianity, Black Americans were assumed to be anti-queer by default, at least culturally. There is certain truth to this, but this is not incidental. That is to say that Black people were forced to adopt the religion of the people who owned them when they first came to America, and in spirituality and Christianity, there was a cultural coping community for religion and religiosity. You may know of the hymns that were famously used as ways to instruct people of how to flee slave plantations and find the Underground Railroad and stuff, for example. That's something they teach in American history classes. It's not wrong to say that Christianity and spirituality have been a huge backbone of Black communities, or traditional Black communities for generations. Though because of how different people interpret the Bible, to assume that just because someone is Christian that they're anti-queer is a reasonable thing to err on the side of caution, but isn't always true. No matter what time you're thinking of, whether it be now or say the 50s. We have had experience with anti-queer sentiment in our upbringing from people who were not very religious. And some people were religious but functionally atheists and only called upon religion for justifying certain behaviors, which is actually part of what made us not want to participate in religion, at least not the religion of the people around us. And the church has been an important place for black organizing before and after slavery. It has been a place for a lot of people to find community, a lot of people to build support systems. It's where a lot of activism came from. Dr. Martin Luther King was literally a pastor. It is hard to deny the influence of black churches on black community, on activism, and on like electoral politics even. And unfortunately, some of that has gotten in the way of intersectionality. Many queer black folks have fought for queer liberation, in part because of the compounding of multiple avenues of oppression, and recognition that many white queers will stop fighting once their rights are secured. A lot of people have been talking recently about... It's kind of a common refrain about like how trans exclusionary radical feminists or anti-trans activists, or however you want to call them, aren't feminists. And although a lot of them don't even claim to be feminists, especially anymore, there's been some discourse about the rhetoric of one true Scotsman fallacying the feminist movement to say that it's never been exclusionary of queer folks or trans folks, especially considering it has been on record exclusionary of both and black people. So actually, there is no context on every wave of feminism without the context of some people with some amount of privilege selling out the people with less privilege so they don't have to be at the bottom with them, and so that they can get their rights and call it a day. The modern version of this was like the wealthy queers who got like married after marriage rights were established in America and weren't fighting for anything else. But even before that, there was this sense of division, say, for women's voting rights. When Susan B. Anthony was fighting for women's voting rights, she explicitly talked about how she was not on the side of like Sojourner Truth, and how she would like rather lose an arm than fight for the black woman's right to vote because the white woman's right to vote was more important or some shit like that. Value of visibility. Our personal experience of black queerness was wrought with imposter syndrome and a sense of not belonging with black folks or queer folks. This was in part because queerness was seen as intrinsically white. There was a lot of things that would later inform our queer identity that we didn't know could be linked to queerness. And although some things were not inherently queer, there is certain like subcultures of our identities that like are kind of obvious now, that we kind of signpost or talk about a lot, like really liking skateboarding or anime even. And there's a lot of like queer fandom in and around like cartoon community, like adult communities that love cartoons, who watch anime, play video games, you know, like the people watching this stream right now. And it was always like this weird like pitting against your cultural like roots of being interested in that stuff too much. And of course, like there's a lot of black anime fans, and I think generationally it's one of those things that was just like, okay, as things get normalized, and especially as like capitalism pays more attention to them and offers people more easy access to like commodify their identity through certain labels and aesthetics, you're seeing more common representation, especially of queer folks. But before, especially in like America, there was like the Hays Code, and representing queerness came a lot of the time down to coding. And of course, because there was no queer like education, and because even though we actually had parents that were very like woke in the actual like traditional Black way, although they weren't very intersectionally aware, or they didn't care as much about intersectionality, at least not in praxis. Shit, barely in theory. But we were aware of the need for like further Black liberation, but we knew next to nothing about queer liberation because it was hidden behind all this metaphor and all these things that spoke to us, but also felt like weirdly foreign and like made us a little bit ashamed because, like, you know, they're villains a lot of the time, like in Disney movies like Scar or Ursula, and they fucking die at the end all the time. And then actually, was it William from the Proud family actually connected with us a lot, and we were ashamed of that for a while because he just did not get any sort of like, he was a joke character. He was always above a joke. The show was not very kind to him. And now he had a glow up. I wish that Drizzle had included a picture of him in like the new Proud Family series. It's like years later. He had a glow up, and like feels very gender non-conforming, and like it's nice living at a time where like progress is shown a lot more visibility, and we wish there was more of that when we were growing up, more like on the nose visibility. It was actually as we were coming of age that, you know, stuff like Steven Universe and stuff was coming out and showed so many great things. But I think in terms of representing like queer bodies that seem to be of color, like it was a big deal to have Steven Universe because, you know, like Garnet, and half of Garnet is Black. I don't know if, I think some people code like blue was a sapphire type gems as like Asian sometimes, but I'm not too sure about that. We've always viewed the rubies as Black coded, and that was like a big deal for us. Not even just having queer characters, because now queer characters are a lot more common in media, animated and not animated. But like Black queer characters, especially who aren't butts of jokes, Black queer characters who get to be happy, like, is so great to see that. Although like the hunt for validation and like to confirm it and the whole culture surrounding that is still like frustrating to us. We had to look around really deep to find out like what race Luz from the Owl House was, and apparently she is Afro-Latina, which is really cool. There's a lot of different types of Black people across the Black diaspora, and although some Black Americans, or many Black Americans, claim Black as like ours, I feel like Black can describe anyone across the like Pan-African diaspora, you know. So we're not gatekeepy about it. Though I would say that generally Black American culture does inform most people's understanding of what being Black is. You can't see me doing air quotes. It's taken a long time for us to feel like at home with our own Blackness, while also feeling at home with our interests not consistently aligning with what would be expected of us, or what we were even grown, like raised in, you know? Current moral panics against queerness recognize the power of visibility, which is why attempts at being made to quell its reach or deem representation as harmful are being made. And I mean, this is pretty obvious, right? Like the reason that queer people are being labeled as groomers and such is because like seeing the rise of people identifying as queer, as trans, at younger and younger ages, and especially with a lot of visibility, is worrying because is worrying to the people who do not like to see that. A lot of people are blaming like a trans contagion or people being tricked into being trans, and this is in no way new. And these are attitudes from people even before this was a thing, or before this was such a thing, and divorced even from like Fox News type politics, I want to say. When we came out as trans, our only living parent literally blamed our partner at the time, who was queer since the day we met them at like 12 years old, and very open about it, for our transness. This person transed you, was what they might have said if it happened like around right now. There wasn't as big an anti-trans sentiment because there wasn't as much visibility for trans people at the time, but it was rising. And our parent did know we were queer on some level, but didn't know exactly how, and because we were hiding it, or at the very least weren't out, they were okay tolerating the possibility. So like the moral panic thing and seeing people as groomers and stuff like that is not new rhetoric at all. If anything, we're raised to believe that if you were queer, then you were in some way sexually abused when you were younger, and that sucked a lot. And I kept this in the closet for a longer time than it had to. Value of visibility 2, Electric Boogaloo. Some folks think that the more inclusive versions of the pride flag are bad, either through over-design or because of labeling it unnecessary. Ignoring the purpose of pride flags and or seeing older flags is inherently better. Can't imagine why. Some people feel like just the normal gay pride flag and maybe even the normal trans pride flag are fine, and we don't need any more iterations. And a lot of people, like, on an offshoot of that, don't like micro-identities in general, which I think is very silly. I would say other words, but I don't want to be too disparaging, especially within our own community. But, I think it's a little bit pick-me-ish to maybe think about like the optics of like too many flags or too many identities, and that's what some people are like about visibility of the community. And having more intersectional visibility, I think, is important, and why we like the Progress Pride flag, especially in its recognition of Black queer bodies, something that gets commonly ignored even amongst some Black people. I should say Black cishet people. That thing, like I said before, about like queer identity being whitewashed and being seen inherently as something white is still a thing. If there is a white person to blame or a white person to use as a rhetorical shield, someone will do it. The Progress Pride flag was displayed in the White House this month, and although it wasn't radical action, right-wingers were quick to talk shit about it. Given queer visibility is so potentially divisive, its importance could not be more clear. It is interesting how we have a government that is federally, optically, apparently in support of trans rights, while there's hundreds of bills being legislated that oppress trans people, trans kids, trans adults, and it's an epidemic right now. And I think the federal government could be doing more, though. Like, we're not fans of inherently electoral political solutions, because radical action on some level is necessary, because like it is a concerted effort, right? And if things could be done in a liberal way of like small steps towards progress, then it would have happened already. But also, it's kind of cruel to tell people to wait for incremental change while they're literally, like, dying. And that goes for anything, not just trans rights, obviously. But that's also the thing about intersectionality and why we think that even though it was just an optics thing for the White House, at least the state isn't so subsumed by fascism that we are like clearly under attack from top to bottom, as opposed to being given a high five while we're drowning. I'd rather someone give me a high five while drowning than keep their hand on my head so I don't come up. But I guess someone is technically trying to keep our head down under the water while another person is trying to give us a high five, which isn't necessarily helpful. Not helpful at all. But at least two people aren't doing it. I never said that this was going to be a positive presentation. I never said this was going to be a positive presentation. In fact, because Drizzle decided to let me do it, she should have at least acknowledged the possibility that I was going to be kind of pessimistic about it. Cause fuck, the world we're living in right now. Juneteenth is supposed to be a celebration of, like, you know, freedom from slavery or whatever, or, you know, like the last of the slaves in Texas being told that they were free, even though they were working while legally free for years. There's still slavery in this country legally, so, like, excuse me that if on any level that I'm still kind of miffed and don't feel as much like celebrating. Same thing with Pride. This is the page. So like I said, Drizzle was working really late into the night on this, and there was the one part that she didn't get to fill in all the way with, like, more information or at least more evidence. She wanted something more to poke at, because, like, moral panics are not new, and people talk about queer moral panics, but there's other ones, and I believe even Prohibition had in part been about like protecting the children from debauchery or whatever. Ooh, excuse me. And a lot of propaganda was made to the deficit of marginalized people, especially regarding like Puritan culture and, like, you know, destroying alcohol and, like, availability of it to protect children. But generally, it's always white children being the scapegoat for the oppression that people are enacting. We're just trying to protect the little white children. And it's the same thing within, like, you know, what's happening to trans people, because, of course, trans people across racial lines are still going to be affected by anti-trans laws and whatnot. But, like, anti-trans violence and bad outcomes for trans people are overwhelmingly experienced by trans people of color, black trans people, indigenous trans people, the like, on like a such higher degree that it's important to mention. So, Stonewall. The woman famous for allegedly throwing the first brick at Stonewall. Marsha P. Johnson is an icon, though her influence on the movement outside of it isn't usually elaborated on. She did try to do a lot while she was alive. I want to say an activist, and she was an activist, but it's one of those things that people even talk about today about where, like, people don't want their identities to be politicized because it's exhausting to constantly talk about why you deserve to exist and be, you know? And it's really frustrating that someone could say something like, you know, I'm gonna eradicate transgender ideology and pretend that they don't mean they're gonna eliminate transgender people to reduce your existence to an ideology. The same thing has been done to other marginalized groups, like super predator, which was a word to actually mean just black youth that people were scared of, right? Dog whistles to not say the quiet part out loud, right? Or I guess to say the quiet part out loud. I forget which it is. But like, to be able to give you an ability to deny, right? There's the tactics aren't new. Again, the tactics aren't new. But what this sort of does for a lot of people, especially people on the furthest edges of the margins, forces them to be activists, even though they don't want to be. And a lot of people just want to live their lives, obviously. But depending on how much the systems and people like in the culture are trying to hurt you, it may be imperative to your survival to fight for liberation. Would Marsha P. Johnson have been an activist if she didn't need to be, if she wasn't literally homeless a lot of her life and a survival sex worker? There's no way of knowing. These were intrinsic parts of like her experience for a long time, but that wasn't the only part of her. And like, allegedly throwing a brick at Stonewall is such an inspirational image, but it flattens the person. Even in the context of like the stuff that she did. And it's nice that she gets remembered the way that she does, but like, it's important to remember that people are people, even like these quote-unquote larger-than-life historical figures. Because Marsha P. Johnson is like the image of like after what we looked at to find out more about her, seems the image of a lot of trans experiences. And she was happy as she could be, but her life could have been so much better. Being a black transgender sex worker and drag queen, she was forced on the margins of society. She tried her best to improve the lives of others in the queer community, but found a lot of racism in the early days of orgs that fought for liberation. Like, I believe it was at the Queer Liberation Front. Just like today, white voices constantly speak over black voices. A lot of times, most times, probably every time, against our interests. It's important to remember that even on the left, there is a lot of racism and a lot of white people believing that they need to be organizers, that they always need to be leaders, and that they know what's best. You don't. Not to say that, and again, intersectionality is important. Not to say intersectionality isn't important, because it is. And like, working together is important. But like, also listen to black people, you know? It's hard, I know. Although I guess if you're here, you're technically already doing it. Good job, keep going. Did you know that Marsha P. Johnson started an organization for protecting unhoused trans youth? It was called the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, or STAR. I'll go into the terminology a little bit, but at the time, there wasn't a term transgender. Marsha was a big part of the drag community. It was a drag queen. There's a lot of ways to look at her identity. And by modern standards, she is considered trans, but at the same time, depending on where she would have fallen in her like conception of like what it means to be trans, she may have not necessarily identified as trans in an unfortunate way. But that is to say, people of her experience, trans people, she tried to help a lot, especially black trans people. STAR was literally about giving trans youth who are kicked out by their families a place to stay. It started out apparently in the back of a pickup truck. Rest in power. Ultimately, Marsha will be found dead on July 6, 1992. Her friends suspected foul play, pointedly showing how black trans women, even the most famous one, was still a victim of anti-trans violence, though she'd been fighting against intersectional bigotry all of her life. A lot of people love to hoist strength and divinity and like all these great things on black people, on black women, on black trans women, and there's a lot of ways for black people to be, for black trans people to be, for black disabled people to be, what have you. And especially in the culture of like black people being like sagely and like our advice and our insights, and like I guess like a lot of stereotypes, there is some reflection of that. It's not just a weird propaganda or a weird thing to make people feel better about their like mistreatment of us or using us as tools or deifying us in certain circumstances but like dehumanizing us in others. But that is to say, in the way of saying that Marsha had a very typical black trans experience, the amount of black trans people killed and who never see justice is enormous. Like people to this day think that she was killed by police. She was apparently 100 times arrested over 100 times, especially for sex work that she did to survive. And that really sucks. And despite like living like on the edge and a lot of times like only having a place to stay because of a good friend giving her a couch, she still was trying to help people, and it speaks volumes to the lives that she was able to affect while still being that way. And I hope it can be inspiring even for people who don't see themselves as important or as affecting other people's lives, that like trying to help out your fellow person, your fellow queer, your fellow marginalized person like does matter and make a difference. And not everyone's gonna be like remembered as like this person who smashed a cop's windshield with a brick from on a light post. She wouldn't have thrown the first brick by most accounts. She actually would have seen what happened after the raid on Stonewall, and then got agitated and was like, okay, I'm gonna break a cop car now. But it's certainly an important figure. It's important to remember not everything is like a movie. I do want to mention also, she was considered trans posthumously. I mentioned that before. She considered herself a transvestite as opposed to a transsexual. The division between the terms at the time was literally, at least by her accounts, to be between being on HRT or having surgery or not. Something that we now would see as transmedicalism, as gatekeeping. And even to this day, there are people who flock to the term transsexual as a way to be like, you know, I have trans my sets. I am to take more ownership of their selfhood, you know? And that's really important, and I think that that's good, but at the same time, it has been used because of medical gatekeeping historically, and we don't generally use it for ourselves because, like, for example, we're struggling with getting hormones right now. So if we're not taking hormones, do we go from being a transsexual to a transvestite till we get back on hormones? Some would say yes. We don't like that rhetoric. And we think that it doesn't do a service to trans people, whether or not they don't seek medical transition, or whether or not a medical transition or certain parts of medical transition are not within reach to them. We wish that Marsha got to live to see how the trans community would change and how she would be considered trans today. Stonewall 2. A biracial, butch lesbian entertainer and drag king. A biracial, butch lesbian entertainer and drag king, Stormy DeLavrier was a queer icon known as the guardian of the lesbians in the village, for routinely being a bouncer for lesbian bars and at one point being the chief of security for the Stonewall Veterans Association. This is a figure we only learned about recently, and it's kind of like, I don't know, like thinking that a story only revolves around like one major character. You think they're the main character, say Marsha P. Johnson, and then you look and you see that there is so many influential figures in and around Stonewall and in and around liberation at the time, especially black queer people if you're willing to look. And it's amazing to see the influence that I say black queer people had. Stormy DeLavrier was not trans as far as I know, but definitely had an influence on queer gender shit. Considered the guardian of the lesbians in the village for routinely being a bouncer for lesbian bars, she did a lot of like protecting like baby lesbians, I guess. She actually called the lesbians she protected her baby girls, and like was very gender subversive. We do want to do more looking up about her, because it'd be interesting to see what her opinions on gender were, and like race, because she was also biracial. She was androgynous and I guess gender ambiguous, could pass for white or black, and that's a pretty unique perspective to be in, especially at the time. She did fight during Stonewall, and is believed by some to have galvanized many to fight against police. There are like conflicting reports of a butch lesbian being like forced into a paddy wagon and fighting back and getting people riled up and starting what would later be called the Stonewall riots, or at least lead to escalations that would become what is called the Stonewall riots. After seeing this Nets quote, we feel weird, and as you can see, you're kind of putting Stonewall riots in quotes, remembering about how like seeing things as a riot and framing it as such has been a way to delegitimize a lot of protests and radical action. And there are other ways to look at what happened, and protest and riot are not the only words. I want to get our brain out of the binary, you know? She said regarding the Stonewall being a riot, it was a rebellion, it was an uprising, it was civil rights disobedience, it wasn't no damn riot. And like, it's so humbling to see that actually people have been radical for a really long time. The people in these like certain ways of thinking about theory and praxis are not new, and that like, as opposed to, oh, it was just that time, you know, people were just like that. There was a lot of conflict, there was a lot of difference of opinion. There were a lot of people as progressive as people now. but we didn't have the internet to like argue about it, I guess. Delavrier was an inspiration for lesbians to wear men's clothes through her style and drag performances. She was a singer. She was a professional singer who rubbed elbows with Billie Holiday and performed to mixed-race audiences during segregation, which was very rare. It may have to do with how she could pass for a white person. I'm sure that that influenced it to some degree. I mean, hell, beyond just like being biracial, your skin tone within like prejudice, not even necessarily being black, but especially in black communities, there's a kind of a culture around like dark-skinned black people and light-skinned black people, and a kind of a conflict because of favoritism of lighter skin tones within the black community and within other communities of darker skinned black people being seen as more violent, as being seen as less civilized, as potentially more criminal, you know? And it has certainly been our experience that as a light-skinned black person, or in a light-skinned black body, we have definitely been treated better in a lot of comparable circumstances that we could easily see the differences of with our darker skinned siblings, and it's fucked up. And it would be silly to deny the. I will be pissed to not mention, or I guess I'll be pissed to mention either way. That like it has led to the advancement of plenty of people of color, or just their survival, like us, for example. But in terms of talking about the whole like gender thing, drag has been a big influential part of the queer and trans community for a very long time. Even though drag queens and drag kings are not necessarily trans, there's a lot about gender performance and a lot in the history of trans people that has a lot to do with drag performances and drag communities. Rust and Power. On the value of mutual aid and the work she does for the community, like, you know, being a bouncer, being all about protecting people, being part of like the Stonewall Veterans Association as like the chief of security, generally like Marsha trying to help people and uplift people and help people survive. Somebody has to care. People say, why do you still do that? I said, it's very simple. If people didn't care about me when I was growing up, with my mother being black, raised in the South, I said I wouldn't be here. And I think that that's incredibly powerful, and why we talk about mutual aid and how important it is, and how we survive off of mutual aid from the people who care about us, and it's been that way for a while, ever since like our life blew up, partially because of the way we were treating people, and just also being too disabled to really like be able to survive the financial burden of not having a home anymore, and like now having a home and, you know, being housed and having food and stuff, and still trying to like improve our situation, but doing it from a place where we're not worried about being homeless next month, you know. And I think that part of the practice we try to follow is, at the very least, creating a safe space, right? That's all we can. That's pretty much all we can do right now. Make a safe space, talk to people, help people work through things, educate people, and that's part of what we do to give back so far. And I think that it shows the value of solidarity. Tall, androgynous, and armed, she held a state gun permit. Miss Delavrier roamed lower 7th and 8th Avenues and points between into her 80s, patrolling the sidewalks and checking in at lesbian bars. She was on the lookout for what she called ugliness, any form of intolerance, bullying, or abuse of her baby girls. She literally walked the streets of downtown Manhattan like a gay superhero. She was not to be messed with by any stretch of the imagination. That's from her obituary. Yeah, like, it's easy to see her as a larger than life figure. She died at 93. All her close relatives had already passed. She had had dementia in the last couple of years and was in a nursing home, but still apparently found it easy to talk about like when she was most invested in liberation and stuff like that. And it's nice to see you know, queer elders get to like live to see some of the world that they helped fight for. Sucks how things are now, but in 2014, like, things were on the rise at least. Well, until they weren't. But there's always something bad happening. There's always oppression happening, even if you're not like fully aware of it. Even if things seem to generally be better optically, that doesn't mean that things actually are, or that there's not just as much harm being done, especially by the state. Queer liberation in the old civil rights movement. Raised by grandparents, this was Bernard Rustin. Bernard Rustin was raised by his grandparents. His grandmother was an activist in the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and accepted his sexuality while being a Quaker with a Methodist husband, which we like to point out because it's like, yeah, sometimes religious people are shit about queerness, but not all the time. It is not universal, and it's important to remember that. This guy, Rustin, was like a huge activist. Definitely someone to be called a disruptor. He seemed to want to protest injustice everywhere he fucking went. Seems to be a through line of his story. He went to a historically black college, but got kicked out because of activism, because of a protest he was doing. He did finish at another school, but like, he actually was galvanized to protest at an early age because of his grandmother being an activist. He was pretty left as well, and it's funny that as a like civil rights activist, he is not more well known because he was a communist, and apparently there was some like Stalinism happening that was asking the like communist party that he was in to basically do tanky shit and basically just stop fighting for civil rights and just support the Stalinist regime. And he was like, no, and became a socialist. But his time as a communist, especially with the Red Scare going on top of his sexuality, led to a lot of suppression of him, of forcing him to kind of not be at the forefront of the movement and work behind the scenes a lot. Even though like a figure like Rosa Parks is famous for bus sitting, there were plenty of people who also did it. Rosa Parks was not the first, nor the last, obviously. And Rustin also did a bus sit-in alone. And he got arrested, and he said, "It occurred to me shortly after there was an absolute necessity for me to declare homosexuality, because if I didn't, I was part of the prejudice. I was aiding and abetting the prejudice that was part of the effort to destroy me." It seemed that at least at this age when he was younger that he was very much thinking about his identity as a black gay man, and it definitely was not something he seemed to be, at least from what we saw, like ashamed of, despite the people around him not always being allies. Often not being allies, maybe one might say. But finding out more about him definitely shed light on our understanding of the diaspora of like queer liberation, especially because of how much black people have been instrumental in queer liberation. Though, interestingly enough, not necessarily Rustin, or at least he didn't believe so. But we'll get to that a little bit later. When arrested for refusing to serve in Vietnam, as a lot of people were protesting in the like the free love movement, hippies, he went to jail and organized protests to fight segregation in prisons. Like I said, wherever he went, he was like, no, this isn't right. He was keen on organizing protests that have a lot of historical weight, like the March on Washington and at least the first Freedom Ride. Though, because he was, during the tenure of the Freedom Rides, was arrested for gay sex, sodomy, and convicted, he didn't want to put negative pressure on the movement, and so resigned. I don't know if you're sensing a pattern. Happy Juneteenth, Nova. I hope you're well. And colorful casts. Hello. Rustin's sexuality and proximity to communism made others in the movement uncomfortable, so he worked behind the scenes for a lot of his activism. I don't think it's mentioned in this presentation that Drizzle put together, but a lot of the context of his historical a lot of context of his contribution to the civil rights movement seems to come, especially in terms of like at a glance, a lot of people being like, oh, he worked closely with Martin Luther King and he was his right-hand man. But I also don't want to put too much, I don't want to lean too much into just his life in regards to King, because like his life was a lot. If a figure deserved to like have like a documentary or like a biopic, this guy would definitely be an interesting figure to like explore. And we think like the messiness of who he was or seemed to be from the little bit of research we were able to do, like kind of reminds us of just how like varied a human experience can be, and how much someone can like hurt and do good. You'll see in a little bit. Because he was kind of because he was someone that not everyone wanted to work with within the civil rights community, at least publicly, he relegated himself to the back channels. He ghost wrote some essays about nonviolent resistance, which he was a big proponent of, and probably why he is also like connected to Dr. Martin Luther King so much, because of, you know, the overlapping of like nonviolent rhetoric. And it really makes us sad, because like he just didn't want his sexuality to get in the way of to liberation, and like we definitely understand. And in a different way, while starting our career, we were very gung-ho about being very open about being an H player, being very open about kink, being very open about polyamory, as well as the leftism stuff that people were more comfortable talking about and being in support of, especially online nowadays. And we wanted to explore, and we always wanted to explore, the intersectionality regarding the different identities of us, but because of the like because of the culture, because we don't want to relegate ourselves just to kink circles, to just like age play circles, because we have a diaspora of friends that are in some of those communities but also not in some of those communities. We do like straddle the line, and we do sometimes lean into some fucking pick-me-ism. I definitely will say we definitely want to be creators that aren't intrinsically linked to just like sets and ooh woo, you know, like many VTubers obviously, but also like I guess we won't necessarily talk about it a lot today, maybe, but definitely this weekend. We were raised with the expectation of being a civil rights activist. And some of that still like affects us to this day. This presentation, part of the reason that Drizzle worked so hard on it was because like the expectation that your parents put on you. Sometimes a parent wants you to be a violinist because they never did or some shit, or they see some athletic potential in you so they can't not imagine you as like a football player or something, right? For us it was civil rights leader, because our parent was fighting for his civil rights and didn't get as far as she wanted, and had to more focus on just the survival and her family eventually. And I'm pretty sure she was kind of jaded about that, but also felt kind of shitty because she couldn't do any more, like, she couldn't by certain terms help people on the scale she wanted to anymore, even though she helped people all the time and like help people like live and survive, that mutual aid sort of thing, and fighting for people who didn't have like legal expertise and stuff like that, while putting this entire huge burden to like carry on this work that we never agreed to, and it's gonna follow us for our entire life. It's gonna follow us into the fucking grave. But like, it's certainly something we think about when we think about Black liberation, and maybe the reason why we yo-yo so much about how much we're gonna lean into like political, especially like Black political stuff in our content, because we kind of have trauma related to it, weirdly. Gosh, there's some typos in this, but hey, she's trying her best, and we're dyslexic. God, I forgot his name again. Bernard Reston. So yeah, Bernard Reston legally adopted his partner because he couldn't marry him, and actually on the backpedaling on the whole like, oh yeah, age play, just mentioning it, I think it's really funny. It's like mommies and daddies, what's stopping you from legally adopting your little? Come on, get with the times. It's like, if we ever fairly lose our marriage rights, we can always adopt each other. I don't know if it's still legally possible to adopt an adult, but I think it's kind of an interesting thing. And like, despite Rustin not feeling like a gay rights activist, it shows that like he did have a gay experience and that he was not trying to hide it, and he was doing all he could to be happy, despite just his identity being a hurdle in other ways, unfortunately. Was concerned about protecting my rights because gay people had no protection. At that time, marriage between a same-sex couple was inconceivable, and so he adopted me. Legally adopted me in 1982, said Walter Nagel, Rustin's adopted partner. That was the only thing we could do to kind of legalize our relationship. We actually had to go through a process as if Bernard was adopting a small child. My biological mother had to sign a legal paper, a paper disowning me. They had to send a social worker to our home. When the social worker arrived, she had to sit us down to talk to us and make sure that this was a fit home. And just, yeah, Drizzle was having a time and a half reading that. And like, best believe that we want to do more presentations like this about other like historical, especially like liberation type stuff, because we'd love to know more about like queer liberation during this time, because a lot of figures were active, and it seems kind of like a weird golden age that we didn't realize, that at least people talk about vaguely, but never describing it in the way that we're kind of seeing it now through actually looking into it. And now we get to some of the bad parts, because like I've been saying continuously, people are people, people are whole human beings, people help and hurt, people aren't just saints, or aren't just devils, you know? However, Drizzle had a hard time saying rest in power for Rustin in particular, because he did a lot of damage on his way out. And we don't think that it is like isolated to like him just suddenly becoming a bad person or something. I think there was a lot of alienation that probably happened because of his queerness, and because of his ties to communism, and you know, not everyone wanting to play ball or being like visibly there with it for him. And I think that may have pushed him to doing some things that I definitely don't fucking condone. Like, fucking Christ. Like, it's like, he was the original Kanye, alright? He was the original Kanye. I'm sorry. He went for being publicly like, I'm gay and I adopted my partner. I'm not gonna sit at the back of the bus. Fuck you. To fucking helping the CIA rig elections against socialists. Like, holy shit. Drizzle made a joke earlier to Snack talking about this. What was it? Either you die of AIDS or you live long enough to see yourself be congratulated by Ronald Reagan. Actually, I guess he didn't see himself congratulated by Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan only like talked positively about him publicly after he died, apparently. But that's also just, that's the last person I want to fucking compliment from. You dig? Especially, I think, to assuage people's fears that he was still like a secret communist. He did later become anti-communist. He didn't seem to become anti-socialist necessarily, and even by some takes, with some people believe that he was a socialist even after he became a conservative. He was part of a group called the Neo-Conservatives, which at first made us think about how like conservative and Democrat, or Republican and Democrat used to be switched before, like back in George Washington-ish days. I think even up until Lincoln damn near. But like, this wasn't that. This is more like the Tea Party. And I'm gonna be real, when we were like, what were we, like 15? When we were like 14, 15, 16, and the Tea Party was starting up, we thought that that was a good thing to some degree. We didn't realize the deep-seatedness of like conservatism's constant desire to rebrand itself as something new and hip while still literally being conservatism, especially in the sense of seeming to be socially liberal but really being conservative in all the economic ways that end up still hurting marginalized people. And so they're like Budweiser putting queer flags on their cans while literally giving money to fuckers like Ron DeSantis or some dumb shit, you know? It's common for adults to adopt each other in Japan. Heads of corporations will adopt employees that promote into second in commands, so a business technically remains family business. Never heard about that. Holy shit, that's interesting. But yeah, Rustin really fucked up at the end. He wasn't, and like I said before, he didn't see himself as as an influential figure for gay rights, though he was a gay civil rights. I don't know if leader would be correct, since he relegated himself to be like a civil rights Littlefinger, I guess, like organizing stuff and even being like a go-between between like politicians and civil rights leaders. Yeah, like I don't think calling him a Littlefinger would be if you know Game of Thrones, would be a wrong-headed description. And we're excited to learn about him as a figure, learning about him literally like this week, and then being completely disappointed and a little bit ashamed of him. And I hate how it's like an example of people being like, hey look, he really did get more conservative as he got older. But honestly, I think it's less about like some sense of, oh, like I'm just older so now I'm naturally more conservative. I think it's a cultural thing, and I think that it is like kind of like a lot of marginalized people, when they get successful enough, stop fighting because they're in a safe place. I mentioned the platonic scapegoat ideal of the well-to-do lesbians who got married and never fought for like trans rights or any other marginalized people's rights after marriage equality got passed. But like it's important to remember that like rich people who are of your marginalized status aren't necessarily on your side, and even if they maybe gesture at liberation, especially under capitalism, they're not going to have any, I shouldn't say any, they're gonna have a lot of forces conspiring to make them okay with it, and they're gonna benefit from the status quo at that point. Yes, they still have to face like certain prejudices, but generally their wealth gets them out of a lot of situations. Gosh, is this gonna be like our political era now, where we're actually talking about political shit? Because now I feel the need to mention Andrew Tate, because Andrew Tate legitimately said that once he had a certain amount of money, he started realizing that he could get away with a bunch of shit because he had money that he could toss his way. And before getting arrested, he actually had mentioned, half jokingly apparently, that he liked living in Romania because he could pay off cops easier, that he could bribe them easier, that there was more corruption, and he benefited from that. Allegedly. And so it's just like, yeah, with a certain amount of privilege, marginalized people can be like tools of the status quo and tools of oppression. And I'm sure he lived comfortably, especially seeing some of the pictures later in his life, and especially considering the age gap between him and his son? Accidental age play got me fucked up. His partner, I'm sorry, brain rot. But then technically, I mean, goddamn. Anyway, intersectionality. Lack of intersectionality and lack of intersectional support can mean that people feel like they can do less, or feel that they have to like assuage one part of their identity at the cost of another. We grew up with a lot of our black elders telling us that we needed to choose between, or maybe not us because they didn't know we were queer, but rather queer people or queer black people need to decide which one they were first. And that ingrained in us a lot of self-hate, because it seemed like black people that we knew who were not queer tended to say black comes first, and so that queer shit has to come at is like the cost, and you can't like quote unquote be fruity or be feminine or, you know, like this sort of thing, or just like in so many different ways be yourself, even if they weren't explicitly, I like to have sex with men, you know? Like, there were so many things. There were so many things about coding. There were so many things being told that we couldn't fucking wave at men. Like, it was the most ridiculous thing ever. And so, like, especially with queerness being framed as a white thing, if you're told to choose between the thing and you feel shunned by your fellow black person, then it makes sense that a lot of people are going to become disillusioned, as we've been disillusioned in the past, and be like, even on even on a surface level, just be like, oh, well, I guess I like hanging out with white people more. And to be fair, I'll say that we have naturally gotten along with white people very much because we're used to it, and we're used to being around y'all, and we're used to acting a certain way that isn't necessarily like an inherent performance that we wouldn't do otherwise, but like we learned ways to be around white people that makes our life easier, and it's hard to unlearn those behaviors. And I don't want to like even throw shade at Rustin for all of his choices, because I'm sure that he got shit for choices that I think are completely legitimate. I would imagine that he probably got shit for having a white partner much younger than him. People saying that people who marry people of different races, especially white people, are trying to marry into privilege, kind of pissed me off. And, you know, we don't have partners of color. The partners we have are white. And we have to think about that a lot, and it's a weird concept sometimes. And it's unfortunate that the intersectionality is lacking a lot, and it pushes people to do really bad things. Though I do want to mention, not everyone who has those experiences end up, you know, betraying the movement and like working for the CIA. I know we haven't. I promise. I will not work for the CIA. God damn it. Oh, also he was a Zionist, which was weird because he said he didn't believe in nationalism, and then when it came to Zionists, it was like a thing. But he also, like, I don't know, maybe it was that thing about like wanting to not appear anti-Semitic, and he did have a lot of solidarity with Jewish activists. I think especially around unionizing and unionist movements. Again, we need to do more research. And he probably died in pain because he had a ruptured appendix, but he did live to be 75. So, like, it is funny that of all the people that we cover in this presentation, he was actually the first to die, but he was also the first to live. Lessons in intersectionality. Rustin was a gay black civil rights leader, but did not consider his work to contribute much to gay liberation. Not that he didn't think it was important. Lack of intersectional acceptance affected his ability to do activism, and eventually, the activism he did. He said on favoring New York's 1986 gay rights bill, "Today blacks are no longer the litmus paper or the barometer for social change. Blacks are in every segment of society, and there are laws that help to protect them from racial discrimination. The new N-words are gays. It is in this sense that gay people are the new barometer for social change. The question of social change should be framed with the most vulnerable people in mind. Gay people." See, this may actually seem like a salient take at first, but unfortunately, like someone like, I don't know, fucking Dave Chappelle, he's flattening the race part. He's only looking at one vector. He's like, oh, black people were everywhere. And of course, with his history in civil rights protests and seeing actual change during his lifetime, he has a bias to believe that even stronger. He's seen the effort of him and his peers actually have like material effects on society, and he's seeing queer people fight and not get as far, and he himself had been suppressed as a queer, even amongst black people. And so like it makes sense that he felt a particular way about gay liberation, because it makes sense if he felt like the gay people had got left behind, that black civil rights leaders chose just black people at the peril of black queer people and queer people in general, in a similar way that what was it, like first wave feminists left behind black women when going for getting women the right to vote. And it sucks because of that narrowness. And I mentioned Dave Chappelle because of him going on to one of his specials and talking about having a problem with white people and kind of implying that the queer community and the people most affected by like queer discrimination are like queer white people, like white trans women, even though even at the time that in 1986, the most marginalized person or the most vulnerable group of people was not gay people in general. It was queer people of color. Or if you want to get like really in the dirt about it, black queer disabled people, or disabled people of color of queer experience, like there's just so much. And that's why intersectionality is important, because without intersectionality, you end up saying shit like this and making it seem like we're competing teams. Motherfucker, you need to understand, this is not a fucking Splatfest. There aren't teams. We need to play together or we're gonna lose. Just like how we've been divided on issues of reproductive justice and trans liberation, as you may very well know. Fucking Christ. I hope I'm preaching to the choir. I really hope I'm preaching to the choir. Marsha was likely murdered, but had been a survival sex worker most of her life. During the AIDS crisis, I don't think that she got HIV, but like she was definitely at risk of it, and she could have died at any time. She lived a life in constant danger. One of the longest stints of housing she had was because of basically pulling a Todd. I don't know who watches BoJack. Basically pulling a Todd after a friend let her stay with her because it was so cold one night that she was afraid that Marsha wouldn't survive the night. And just, never left for a while, for like a year or something. And we think about that in intersectionality, but also like what Delarcier was saying about like if she didn't get help, that she and her mother wouldn't have survived. In that same way, I'll reiterate that Marsha could have done so much more work and helped more people if she could have just gotten her needs met. She was constantly pouring from a picture that had like a hole in it, And I think that that's an important part of liberation. Not just, fighting for that radical change, but like radically helping people survive. Because the more people have full pictures that don't have holes in them, the more we can share what we have and lift each other up. Because even if, say, like the liberal bullshit of incrementalism was a thing, that was something we should be primarily fighting for, practice has to include helping people out now, meeting people where they're at, helping people survive, because the system is killing us. You too. And it's important to like help as many people buoy as possible. Intersectional support can save people, can help them thrive, including mutual aid. A couch to sleep on can be more valuable than you think. I don't think I have to say anything else about that. Further readings. Wikipedia is your friend. These are just the Wikipedia pages for, this one's, this one's a mistake here. It's supposed to be, because this is for Storm DeLavre, then Marsha P. Johnson. The last one was supposed to be for, I'm sorry, I keep forgetting his name. Sorry, Drizzle. Bernard Reston. So yeah, most of our sources came from their Wikipedia pages. This is just an introduction. If you want to know more about these figures or about queer liberation, especially Black queer liberation, because it's kind of intrinsic to the movement, there's information and resources. This is to get you started, but like, we're by no means an exhaustive resource. It's important to seek out Black voices, voices of color, marginalized voices, intersectionally marginalized voices. We tend to have a lot of good things to say. Books, although they didn't have a big effect on our presentation today, but books that are in our library right now that we hope to visit for more stuff later. Transgender History by Susan Stryker, and Black on Both Sides, A Racial History of Trans Identity by C. Riley Snorton. That's a funny name. So yeah, that has been our presentation. Black Lives Matter. I've been Duskbite. Thank you very much.